The invitation was meant to be a joke. Damon Reyes didn't say it cruelly. At least, that's what he told himself later. He said it the way powerful men sometimes say things, casually, without thinking about the weight behind the words. His annual charity gala was 3 days away, and 2 of his oldest business associates had been giving him a hard time over dinner about coming alone again. "Bring someone," Marcus had said, refilling his glass. "Anyone, even that maid of yours." The table laughed. Damon laughed too. And then, because he had a strange habit of following through on things people assumed he wouldn't, he walked back into the house that evening and told Naomi exactly that. She was in the kitchen, wiping down the marble countertops, still in her uniform. She looked up at him without blinking, the cloth in her hand going still. "The gala," he said. "Saturday. You should come." Naomi studied him for a moment. She had worked in his Boston mansion for 2 years, and in that time, she had learned to read his moods the way you learn to read weather, not from what he said, but from the space around it. This felt different, lighter, almost amused. "As a joke?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. That was answer enough. "All right," she said, and went back to wiping the counter. He had expected her to decline. He had half expected her to look embarrassed. She did neither. Saturday arrived, and the Reyes mansion was already lit up like something from a magazine spread by the time the first guests filtered through the iron gates. Crystal glassware, string quartets, the kind of crowd that didn't look at price tags because they'd long since stopped being relevant. Damon stood near the entrance with Marcus and 2 other associates, greeting guests the way he always did, firmly, with that particular stillness that made people feel they were being evaluated, even during small talk. He had mostly forgotten about Naomi. Then the room shifted. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of shift that happens when something pulls at everyone's attention at once, like a current running through water. Damon noticed people near the entrance turning. He noticed the conversations thinning. He turned too. Naomi was walking in. She wore a deep burgundy gown, fitted and floor-length, her natural curves filling it with an effortless confidence that made the fabric look like it had been designed specifically for her full figure. Her hair was pulled back in a way that was simple but deliberate, and she moved through the room the way someone moves when they're comfortable in their own body, unhurried, upright, steady. She wasn't performing anything. That was the part that stopped people. Damon didn't move for a full 3 seconds. Marcus leaned toward him slowly. "That's your maid?" "That's Naomi," Damon said, and even he noticed something strange in his own voice, a kind of careful flatness, like he was working to keep it even. She reached him. Up close, she looked calm, though there was something in her eyes, a quiet alertness, like she was watching everything at once without appearing to. "You came," he said. "You invited me," she replied simply. He almost smiled. "You want a drink?" "I want to not stand by the entrance all night." He led her into the room. For the first hour, things were normal. Naomi moved alongside him during introductions, saying the right things in the right moments, without overreaching. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. Somehow that made her more impressive. Damon found himself watching her more than he intended to, then stopping himself, then doing it again. It was during the second hour that everything changed. Damon noticed the man first because of the way he had gone still in a room full of movement. He was older, somewhere in his late 60s, with the posture of someone who had spent decades leaning over desks in small offices. He was standing near the edge of the room, holding a glass he hadn't touched, and he was staring at Naomi. Not the way men sometimes stared at women at parties. This was different. This was the look of someone who had seen a ghost. Damon kept him in his peripheral vision and waited. Within minutes, the man crossed the room and touched Damon's arm. "Forgive me," he said quietly. His voice was measured, but there was something underneath it, a kind of controlled urgency. "My name is Elliot Mercer. I don't believe we've formally met, though I know who you are." He paused. "Who is that woman?" "She works for me," Damon said carefully. "Why?" Elliot's jaw tightened slightly. "I've been looking for someone for 11 years. A woman who disappeared after witnessing a private meeting between several very powerful business figures. A meeting that was never supposed to have witnesses." He looked at Naomi again. That woman was using a different name each time she surfaced. But the face, he stopped himself. The face is too close to ignore. Damon kept his expression neutral. "You think Naomi is this missing woman?" "I think," Elliot said slowly, "that your maid might be connected to something she doesn't even know she's connected to." Before Damon could respond, Elliot's phone lit up in his pocket. He glanced at the screen, and whatever calm he had been maintaining cracked just slightly. His face went carefully blank in the way people's faces go blank when they're frightened and trying not to show it. "I need to leave," he said. "We're not done talking," Damon said. "No," Elliot agreed, already stepping back. "We're not. But tonight we are." He was gone within 2 minutes, slipping through the crowd and out a side door before Damon could follow without making a scene. Damon stood where he was, holding his glass, watching the space where the man had been. Across the room, Naomi was laughing at something one of the other guests had said, completely unaware of any of it. He looked at her differently now, carefully, trying to see what Elliot Mercer had seen. He didn't know what he was looking for yet, but he had the distinct feeling that finding it was going to change everything. Damon didn't sleep. He sat in his study until well past 2 in the morning, running Elliot Mercer's name through every database and contact he had access to. What came back was thin, but credible. Retired investigative journalist, 30-year career, mostly financial crimes and corporate fraud. Last published piece was 11 years ago, an unfinished series about a whistleblower case that went cold before it ever reached print. Then nothing. No bylines, no public appearances, just a man who had quietly stepped out of the world and kept walking. Damon closed his laptop and made a decision. He found the hotel by morning. One of his associates had tracked Elliot's car to Providence, Rhode Island, a waterfront property called the Harbor View, the kind of place that had been grand once and was now surviving on the memory of it. Dark wood paneling, brass fixtures gone slightly green at the edges. The lobby smelled like old paper and salt air. The woman at the front desk told him Elliot Mercer had checked out at 6 that morning. "Did he leave anything?" Damon asked. She hesitated, then reached beneath the counter and produced a sealed envelope. Cream-colored, no name on the front. Just a small red mark in the corner that looked like it had been made with a thumbnail pressed into wax. "He said someone would come asking," she said. Damon took it. He opened it in the lobby, standing near a window that looked out over the gray morning water. Inside were 2 things: a brass room key, old-fashioned, with the number 407 stamped into it, and a single note card, handwritten in small, deliberate letters. If she came back, the answers are hidden, where room 407 never closed. He read it twice. Then he went upstairs. Room 407 was at the end of a long corridor on the 4th floor. The carpet runner worn pale down the center from years of foot traffic. The key turned in the lock smoothly, which surprised him. He had half-expected resistance, something dramatic to match the moment. Instead, the door swung open quietly, onto a room that looked almost ordinary. Almost. It had been cleaned. The bed was made, the surfaces were bare, but on the wall opposite the window, where most hotel rooms had a generic print of boats or flowers, there was a single framed landscape photograph. It showed a stretch of coastline, rocky, gray-green, with a lighthouse far in the distance and a cluster of pine trees along the ridge above the water. The kind of scenery that could have been anywhere along the northeastern coast. Damon lifted it off the wall. On the back, written in pencil in handwriting different from Elliot's note card, was a date. Nothing else, just a date from 16 years ago. He photographed it and called Naomi. She arrived 2 hours later, still in the casual clothes she'd driven in, her hair loose around her shoulders. She stepped into the room, looked around once, and then her eyes landed on the photograph. Damon watched her face. Something moved across it. Not recognition exactly, but something close to it. The way a word sits on the tip of your tongue and won't quite come forward. "Where is this?" she asked. "That's what I'm trying to figure out." She took the photograph from him and held it closer. Her brow pulled together slightly. "I know this place," she said. Then she caught herself. "That doesn't make sense. I've never been to Rhode Island. The photo might not be from Rhode Island." She looked at him. "Elliot left this room specifically," Damon said. "He left a key to it. He knew someone would come. He put this on the wall because he wanted whoever walked in here to see it." Naomi set the photograph down on the bed carefully, like it was something that could break. "Why would a journalist I've never met want me to see a landscape? I don't think it's just a landscape." She looked at it again. The coastline, the lighthouse, the tree line along the ridge, the date on the back. She said quietly, 16 years ago. You would have been, what, early 20s? 22, she said, without calculating. It came out automatic, which meant the number already meant something to her, even if she didn't know what. Damon filed that away. "We need to find where this was taken," he said. She nodded slowly, still looking at the photograph. Then she said something he hadn't expected. "There's a gallery." He looked at her. "I don't know why I know that," she said, and her voice was careful now, almost cautious. "But when I look at this, I keep thinking about a gallery. Small, somewhere with a lot of light." She shook her head slightly. "I can't pull it any further than that." Damon didn't press her. He had learned early in his career that pushing people toward something they were almost remembering usually pushed it further away. He picked up the photograph and turned it over again, studying the penciled date. 16 years ago meant whatever this was, it started long before Elliot's last published piece. Long before the whistleblower case went cold. Long before any of it became visible from the outside. Whatever the missing woman had witnessed had roots that went deeper than anyone had bothered to look. Or deeper than anyone had been allowed to look. He slid the photograph under his arm. "We're going to Maine," he said. Naomi turned to look at him. "Why Maine?" "Because that coastline isn't Rhode Island. And because you just told me there's a gallery without knowing how you know that." He moved toward the door. "That's enough to start with." She stood in the middle of the room for a moment, looking at the empty wall where the photograph had hung. Then she followed him out. Portland, Maine was cold for the time of year. The kind of cold that comes off the water and gets into your jacket before you realize it. Sharp and quiet and persistent. Damon had driven them up from Providence without stopping. And by the time they reached the art district, it was early afternoon. The streets narrow and uneven, beneath old brick buildings that leaned slightly toward each other, like they were sharing a secret. He had done some work overnight. The coastline in the photograph matched a stretch of shoreline about 40 minutes north of Portland, a specific ridge angle, a specific lighthouse configuration. Only one gallery in the area had been operating long enough to connect to a date 16 years back and still be standing. It was called Halcyon, small, street level. The kind of place you could walk past without noticing unless the light was hitting the window a certain way. They walked in together. The interior was warmer than the street, and quieter. Paintings covered nearly every surface, coastal scenes, fog-heavy landscapes, a few abstract pieces that didn't quite fit with the rest. The smell was linseed oil and something faintly woody, like cedar or old frames. An elderly man emerged from behind a curtained doorway at the back. He was slight, with paint-stained fingers, and the deliberate movements of someone whose body had slowed down, but whose mind hadn't. He looked at Damon, then at Naomi, and something shifted in his expression, a careful stillness that came and went before Damon could fully read it. "We're not really open today," the man said. "I know," Damon said. He held up the framed photograph. "We're here about this." The man looked at it for a long moment. Then he let out a slow breath through his nose and gestured for them to follow him. His name was Bernard Cole. He had owned Halcyon for 31 years, he said. And for most of those years, it had been a working studio, as much as a gallery. He painted every morning and sold when he felt like it, which wasn't always. He led them past the front room into a side space that clearly served as storage. Canvases stacked against the walls, some framed, most not. He moved through the stacks with the ease of someone who knew exactly where everything was, despite appearances. "The photograph was based on one of mine," he said, without looking back at them. "Someone had it reproduced. I didn't authorize that. But I stopped being surprised by what people do without asking a long time ago." He stopped at a particular stack near the far wall and began carefully pulling canvases forward one by one. "She came in for the first time about 17 years ago," he said. "Quiet woman, said she liked the coastal work. She came back maybe 8 or 9 times over the following year. Never bought anything, just looked and talked, and sometimes sat in here for an hour without saying a word." He found what he was looking for and turned a canvas around. Damon heard Naomi go still beside him. The painting showed a woman seated near a window, her face turned slightly away, looking out toward water. The likeness wasn't photographic. Bernard painted in a style that was impressionistic, soft at the edges, but the shape of her face, the set of her shoulders, the particular way she held herself, was close enough to be startling, close enough to Naomi to make the back of Damon's neck tighten. Bernard pulled out another canvas. Same woman, standing this time, near a doorway. Then another, her profile, in low light. Every portrait was unfinished. Each one stopped at a point that felt deliberate, like the artist had chosen to leave something out. "She used a different name each time she visited," Bernard said. "First time she was Claire, then Margaret, then she was Anna for a while." He set the last canvas down and looked at Naomi directly. "You look like her, more than a little." "Who was she?" Naomi asked. Her voice was steady, but Damon could hear the effort in it. "I don't know," Bernard said simply. "I stopped asking after the second visit. Some people don't want to be found, and I've always thought that was their right." He paused, but she talked. Not about herself, never about herself. About places she'd been, things she'd seen. She was careful about details, always edited as she went. But after enough conversations, you start to hear what's underneath. "What was underneath?" Damon asked. Bernard considered this. Fear. The kind that's been managed for so long, it almost looks like calm. He looked at the unfinished portraits. She was carrying something heavy, something she couldn't put down and couldn't share. He moved to a small wooden cabinet near the window and opened the top drawer. Inside was a collection of small papers, receipts, a few business cards. He sorted through them carefully and produced a folded slip of yellow paper. "Last time she came in, she left this behind. I don't think it was an accident." He held it out to Naomi. "I kept it because I thought someday someone would come looking. Took longer than I expected." Naomi unfolded it. It was a storage receipt, a facility name, an address in Manchester, New Hampshire, and a unit number. The date on it was 15 years ago. She carried a silver notebook, Bernard added as they moved toward the door. "Every visit. Never set it down. Never opened it in front of me. Whatever was in it mattered to her more than anything else she had." Naomi looked down at the receipt in her hand. Damon looked at the unfinished portraits one last time before they left. That same woman, painted over and over, always almost finished, always holding something back. He was beginning to understand that every piece of this had been left deliberately. Elliot's envelope, the photograph on the wall, the receipt in a 30-year-old cabinet. Someone had built a trail. They just hadn't known who would end up following it. Manchester was a 4-hour drive from Portland. They stopped once for coffee and fuel, neither of them talking much. Naomi held the storage receipt in her lap the entire drive, not looking at it, just keeping it there the way you keep something in your hand when you're not sure what to do with it yet. Damon drove and said nothing. He had learned over the years that silence was sometimes the most useful thing you could offer someone. Naomi was processing. Pushing her wouldn't help. It was late afternoon by the time they reached Manchester, the sky doing that thing it does in early autumn, where the light goes golden and flat all at once, making everything look slightly unreal. The storage facility was on the eastern edge of the city. Brick front, metal roll-up doors painted the same dull gray as the chain-link fence surrounding it. A small office at the entrance with a light on inside. The man behind the desk looked at the receipt for a long time. "This unit's been paid through a trust account," he said slowly. "Automatic renewal. Every year. No name attached. Just a payment reference number." He looked up. "Nobody's accessed it in 15 years. "We have the receipt," Damon said. The man looked at Naomi. She met his eyes steadily and said nothing. Damon had noticed she did that, held eye contact without filling the silence, which made people slightly uncomfortable in a way that usually worked in her favor. The man copied down the receipt details, made a phone call that lasted under 2 minutes, and then handed them a second key. "Unit 34, he said. "Down the second row, left side." The unit was larger than Damon had expected. When the roll-up door lifted, the space inside was clean and dry, which meant the climate control had been running consistently. Along both side walls, plastic storage containers were stacked in careful columns, each one labeled in the same small, precise handwriting. In the center of the space, a wooden table held a flat archival box, positioned deliberately, like someone had left it ready to be opened first. Naomi stood in the entrance for a moment. Then she stepped inside and reached for the archival box. Inside were travel journals, 12 of them, identical black covers, each labeled with a date range on the spine. Beside the journals, a collection of hotel receipts bundled with rubber bands, properties across the eastern seaboard, spanning what looked like a decade. Beneath those, 4 small audio recording devices, the kind journalists used before everything moved to phones. And beneath those, a series of maps. Damon lifted one carefully. It showed the northeastern United States, and across it, marked in red ink, were locations, cities, specific streets, and in several places, small symbols he didn't immediately recognize. Not arrows, not standard map markings, something more deliberate, almost coded. He set it aside and opened one of the plastic containers along the wall. Photographs, hundreds of them, organized by date, each one showing locations rather than people. Buildings, meeting rooms, photographed from outside through windows. Parking lots, with specific vehicles circled. The kind of documentation that takes months to build and enormous patience to maintain. She was building a case, Naomi said from behind him. He turned. She had one of the journals open, reading carefully. She tracked these people for years, Naomi continued. Hotels they used, meetings they held off the books. She has dates, times, who came in and out. She turned a page. Whoever she was, she knew exactly what she was doing. Damon moved to look over her shoulder. The journal entry was detailed and precise, the language of someone trained to document, to record, to build something that would hold up. Naomi turned forward several pages, then stopped. "Here," she said quietly. The entry was longer than the others. At the top, in letters slightly larger than the surrounding text, were two words underlined once: "The Silent Witness." Damon read the full entry. The missing woman had written about the witness carefully, obliquely, never using a name or a specific description. She referred to this person as someone who had been present without intending to be, someone who had overheard a conversation that altered the entire shape of what she had been investigating. Someone whose testimony, if it could ever be recovered, would be the single piece that made everything else provable. The implication throughout the entry was clear. Everyone who had read this far assumed the missing woman herself was the silent witness, that she had given herself that name, that the whole investigation was self-referential. Damon read it again more slowly. Then he caught it. "She's not talking about herself," he said. Naomi looked up at him. He pointed to a line midway through the entry. "Here," she writes, "the witness arrived without knowing what they were walking into. I had already been watching for 3 months before that evening. When they left, I stayed. We were never in the same room at the same time. The silence in the storage unit was total. She's describing 2 separate people," Naomi said slowly. "The missing woman was the investigator," Damon said. "She spent years documenting everything, but the witness, the actual person who overheard the meeting, that was someone else entirely." He lowered the journal. "Everyone assumed it was her, but she never actually said that. She protected the real witness by letting people draw the wrong conclusion." Naomi stared at the journal page. Outside, the light had gone completely flat, the last of the afternoon giving up. Neither of them moved to turn on the overhead unit light, and for a moment they just stood in the half-dark among someone else's carefully ordered life. "Who is the witness?" Naomi asked. Damon looked at her, at the way she was gripping the journal, at the slight tension around her eyes that had been building since Portland and hadn't left. He didn't answer her question. He didn't need to yet, but he was beginning to form a thought that he wasn't ready to say out loud. Burlington was 7 hours north. Damon made the drive the following morning, leaving Manchester before sunrise, with Naomi asleep in the passenger seat and the maps from the storage unit spread across the back seat in the order he had organized them the night before. He had spent most of the night going through the audio devices, trying to get them to play. 2 were dead. 1 produced static. The 4th had power, but was password protected. He had photographed every journal page, every map marking, every hotel receipt, before locking the storage unit back up. Whatever was in that space, he wasn't ready to move it yet. Moving things had a way of making them disappear. Naomi woke somewhere near Concord, looked out the window for a moment, then reached into the back seat and picked up one of the maps without being asked. She studied it quietly while he drove. "The symbols," she said after a while, "the ones that aren't cities. I noticed them. 4 of them form a rough line. Burlington is one of them." He glanced over. She had a pen in her hand and had lightly connected 4 of the marked points. "The others?" he asked. "Finger Lakes region in New York, Asheville, North Carolina, and Savannah, Georgia." He looked back at the road. She mapped the whole route. "Looks like it." He didn't say what he was thinking, which was that whoever had built that trail had done it knowing someone would eventually need to follow it in exactly the right order. This wasn't documentation, it was instruction. They reached Burlington by early afternoon. The city sat comfortably against Lake Champlain, the water visible from most of the main streets. Everything slightly quieter than cities further south. Damon had no specific address to work from. The Burlington marker on the map was placed near the waterfront district, which covered several blocks. He parked near the lake, and they walked. It took 40 minutes before Naomi noticed him. "That man," she said, without pointing, keeping her voice level. "Gray jacket. He's been behind us since we left the car." Damon didn't turn immediately. He steered them toward a small cafe on the corner, held the door for Naomi, and once inside, moved to a table with a clear sightline to the street. The man in the gray jacket slowed outside. He was somewhere in his mid-50s, lean, with the kind of face that didn't hold expression easily. He looked through the cafe window once, briefly, then moved on. But he didn't go far. Damon could see him across the street, looking out at the water, with his hands in his pockets. "He's not trying very hard to hide," Naomi said. "No," Damon agreed, "he's not." That was the part that kept him from reacting immediately. In his experience, people who wanted to follow you without being seen were good at it. This man was maintaining just enough distance to avoid confrontation while staying close enough to be noticed, which meant being noticed was the point. They ordered coffee they didn't particularly want and watched him for 20 minutes. He didn't approach anyone, didn't make calls, just waited. Eventually, Damon stood up. "Stay here," he said. Naomi looked at him. "That's not something I'm going to do." He almost argued, then decided against it. She had a point, and he knew it. They went out together. The man saw them coming and didn't move. That alone told Damon something. He stood with his hands still in his pockets, looking out at the lake, and only turned when they were close enough that turning was unavoidable. "Grant Sullivan," Damon said. He had run the description through 2 contacts during the coffee he hadn't drunk and gotten a name back 20 minutes ago. The man nodded once. "You're faster than I expected." "Who are you?" Naomi asked. Grant looked at her for a moment with an expression that was harder to read than most. Something between relief and something older than relief. Someone who's been trying to make sure you stayed safe without you knowing you needed to be. "That's not an answer," she said. "It's the truest one I have right now." He turned slightly, so his back was to the street. "I worked with Elliot Mercer for 6 years. After his series went cold, he didn't stop. He just stopped publishing. We've been following this case privately since then, the 2 of us, trying to build enough to hand to someone who could actually do something with it." "Where is Elliot now?" Damon asked. "Safe. The message he got at your gala was a warning from me, not a threat. I needed him out of the room before someone else noticed what he was reacting to." Grant glanced at Naomi. "The people connected to that original meeting have been quiet for years, but quiet doesn't mean gone. When she walked into a room full of people who move in the right circles, I got nervous." "You've been watching Naomi," Damon said. It wasn't a question. "Watching out for," Grant said carefully. "There's a difference. I've known approximately where she was for about 4 years. I never made contact, because contact would have drawn attention." He paused. "You 2 pulling the thread yourselves is both the best and worst thing that could have happened." "Best and worst how?" Naomi asked. "Best because you're close. Worst because moving fast attracts notice." He reached into his jacket and produced a folded paper. "This is the last piece of the map. The sequence, the recording studio, the journals, the storage unit. It all feeds here." Damon took it. "A location in the Finger Lakes region of New York. A property name. A set of coordinates written beneath it." "A recording studio," Grant said. "Closed 11 years ago, but what was recorded inside never left." He looked at them both evenly. "Whatever you think this case is about, you're still 1 layer away from what it actually is." He stepped back. "Don't rush the last stretch," he said. "Rushing is how people make mistakes they can't take back." Then he turned and walked along the waterfront, unhurried, and didn't look back. Damon stood holding the paper. Beside him, Naomi was looking out at the lake, her expression unreadable. "1 layer away," she said quietly. "That's what he said." She turned from the water. Then let's go find it. The Finger Lakes region arrived slowly. That was the only way Damon could describe it. The landscape didn't change all at once, but gradually, the highway giving way to two-lane roads, then to narrower ones, lined with old maple trees, whose roots had started lifting the asphalt at the edges. The lakes appeared between hills without announcement, flat and silver in the early morning light, surrounded by vineyards and old farmland that had been sitting in the same families for generations. The property Grant had marked was off a gravel road about 3 miles from the nearest town. No signage. A rusted gate standing open, which meant either someone had left it that way years ago or someone had been here recently enough to unlatch it. Damon drove through slowly. The studio building was low and long, set back from the tree line, built in a style that suggested it had been designed to be invisible from the road. Wood-sided, dark-stained, with a gravel lot out front where weeds had pushed through the stones in a way that confirmed the years of disuse. A small sign above the door, weathered to near illegibility, read Lakeview Sound. The front door was locked with a padlock that looked newer than everything around it. Damon looked at it for a moment, then looked at Naomi. "Grant knew we were coming here," she said. "He did." She reached into the pocket of her jacket and produced a small key she hadn't mentioned before. He looked at it. "It was taped to the back of the map," she said. "I didn't say anything because I wanted to see if you'd notice." "I didn't. I know." She said it without any satisfaction in it, just fact, and moved past him to the door. The padlock opened on the first try. Inside, the studio had been left in a state that sat somewhere between abandoned and preserved. The recording booth glass was intact. The main board was covered with a canvas drop cloth that had kept most of the dust off. Along the back wall, a metal shelving unit held rows of archived recordings, reel-to-reel tapes in labeled boxes, organized by date, with the same careful handwriting Damon had been seeing since Manchester. The missing woman had been here too. Or someone working on her behalf had. Naomi moved to the shelving unit and began reading the labels. Damon pulled the drop cloth off the main board and found a standalone playback unit underneath. Older technology, but intact, connected to a power strip that ran to a generator outlet along the base of the wall. He checked the generator outside the back door. It had been recently fueled. Grant had been here. He started it, came back inside, and the board flickered on with a low hum. "Here," Naomi said. She was holding a tape box. The label had a date from 17 years ago, and a single word beneath it, "Final." Damon threaded it carefully and hit play. The recording began with ambient sound, a room, interior, with the low murmur of a ventilation system running somewhere. Then voices, 2 of them initially, both male, both speaking with the measured cadence of men who were used to conversations that didn't leave rooms. The content was specific. Over the course of the recording, the 2 men laid out what amounted to a systematic plan to restructure the ownership of 3 large companies through a series of forged acquisition agreements. The language was careful but clear enough. They had done this before. They expected to do it again. And the mechanisms they described involved financial intermediaries positioned specifically to make the paper trail circular and nearly impossible to untangle from the outside. A third voice entered about 12 minutes in. This one was different, older, more deliberate, the kind of voice that spoke less, because it needed to say less to be understood. This voice confirmed the final agreement, gave a date, named 2 additional parties who weren't in the room but had already signed. Then it said something that made Damon stop the tape. He rewound it, played it again. "The room was clean when we started. Make sure it stays that way after. The only variable I haven't accounted for is the door on the east corridor. Someone check it before we proceed." A pause on the tape. Footsteps. Then a different voice, younger, slightly hurried. "East corridor is clear. Door was closed. Nobody there." The third voice again. "Good. Then we're finished." Damon looked at Naomi. She was standing very still with her arms crossed. Not from coldness, from something else. Something internal that had pulled her posture tight. "The East Corridor," she said. "You've heard that phrase before," he said. It wasn't a question. Her face had told him before she spoke. "I don't know where," she said quietly, "but I've heard someone say that. East Corridor. Those exact words." She pressed her fingers briefly to her temple. "It's like trying to remember a dream. It's there and then it moves." Damon played the rest of the tape. The final minutes contained only the sounds of the room emptying, chairs moving, a door closing, then silence. But before the silence, barely audible beneath the sound of movement, there was something else. A sound that didn't belong to the men leaving the room. Soft, brief, the quiet sound of a door being pulled shut carefully from the other side. Someone had been in that East Corridor. Someone who had heard everything and then left without making enough noise to be noticed until now, 17 years later, in a recording studio in the Finger Lakes with the generator running and the maple trees pressing against the windows outside. Naomi stood in the middle of the room with her eyes closed. Damon watched her and said nothing, because there was nothing to say yet. The tape ran out. The room went quiet, and in that quiet, something was becoming visible that had been buried under years of other people's careful work. He just needed a few more pieces before he could say it out loud. Asheville arrived like an exhale. After the sharp cold of the Northeast, the Blue Ridge Mountains held a different kind of air. Softer, older somehow, the kind of atmosphere that made you feel the land had been absorbing things for centuries and had learned patience from it. The drive down from New York had taken most of a day, and by the time they reached the city, it was evening, the hills around it holding the last light longer than the sky itself. Damon had made contact through Grant with a document specialist based in Asheville, a woman named Dr. Patricia Hale, who had spent 20 years in forensic linguistics before leaving academic work to consult privately. She was the kind of professional who understood how to read what documents didn't say as precisely as what they did. They met her at her office, a converted row house on a quiet street above the main district, the interior lined with reference volumes and flat document drawers of the kind used in architectural firms. She was somewhere in her early 60s, with reading glasses on a chain around her neck and the direct manner of someone who had spent decades being the most precise person in every room she entered. Damon laid the journal photographs across her work table. She looked at them for a long time, without touching anything. "You said one author," she said eventually, looking at Damon. "That's the assumption we've been working from." She shook her head slowly. "Two." She pulled on cotton examination gloves and lifted the first photograph carefully, then set it beside the last. "Look at the baseline. The way the letters sit on the line, early entries, consistent, controlled, slight leftward lean, standard for someone trained in detailed documentation." She moved to the final pages. "These are different. The baseline is more variable. The pressure is lighter. The letter formation in the G's and Y's is completely distinct." Naomi leaned forward. "How many pages?" "The last 11 pages of the final journal." Dr. Hale set the photographs down in two distinct groups. Different author entirely, written in the same notebook, with effort made to maintain visual continuity. Same pen type, similar sizing. Someone who studied the original handwriting before they wrote. She looked at them over her glasses. This was deliberate. Whoever wrote the final pages wanted the difference to go unnoticed, unless someone looked very closely. "What do the final pages say?" Damon asked. Dr. Hale had already read through the transcription he had sent ahead of their arrival. She removed her glasses and set them on the table. "They say the missing woman made a decision," she said carefully. She had spent years building an evidence base around what she witnessed and documented. But at some point, she realized the case had a problem. She paused. The problem was that her own testimony was compromised. She had been so close to the investigation for so long, had moved in circles adjacent to the people she was documenting, that any legal challenge would raise questions about her credibility and her methodology. So the case needed a cleaner witness, Damon said. More than that, Dr. Hale said. It needed someone who had been present completely by accident. Someone with no prior connection to the investigation, no reason to be there, no agenda. She folded her hands on the table. The final pages describe that person. They describe how the missing woman located them, confirmed what they had unknowingly witnessed, and then made a decision to remove them from the visible record before anyone connected to the original meeting could find them first. The room was very quiet. Naomi was standing beside the table with her eyes on the journal photographs, and she had gone very still in a way that was different from all the other times she had gone still on this journey. This was the stillness of someone standing at the edge of something and knowing it. The employment records, Dr. Hale continued, more gently now. The final pages describe changing someone's employment history, removing a specific event from their documented work timeline, an event listing them as a temporary adult event assistant at a private charity fundraiser. Naomi looked up. 16 years ago, Dr. Hale said. The night of the meeting in the recording. The silence stretched. Damon watched Naomi's face go through something that had no clean name. It wasn't shock exactly, because some part of her had been moving toward this since the gala, since the photograph on the hotel wall, since Bernard Cole's unfinished portraits. It was more like watching a long-held breath finally released. "I was there," Naomi said. Her voice was very quiet. "You were delivering documents," Dr. Hale said, reading from her notes. "Temporary staff for the event. The East Corridor access was part of the standard delivery route for that floor." She set the notes down. "You wouldn't have known what you were hearing. You would have heard a conversation through a door, perhaps only fragments of it, and then you would have moved on." "I don't remember any of it," Naomi said. "You suffered a severe highway accident, approximately 8 months after that evening," Damon said quietly. He had found the record 2 nights ago, and had been holding it, waiting for the right moment. The kind that affects memory in ways that aren't always visible from the outside. Naomi sat down slowly in the chair beside the table. "She protected me," she said. "The missing woman. She found out I'd been there, took me out of the record before anyone else looked, and then disappeared herself to make sure no one followed the connection back to me. She gave up her own identity," Dr. Hale said simply, "so yours could stay intact." Naomi looked at the journal photographs spread across the table. Someone else's years of careful, patient, costly work. All of it ultimately aimed at keeping one unsuspecting young woman safe from consequences she had stumbled into without knowing. Damon pulled a chair beside her and sat down. He didn't say anything. Sometimes there was nothing to say that wouldn't make a moment smaller than it was. Savannah was the last stop. The city announced itself gradually, Spanish moss hanging from oak trees that lined the streets in long, cathedral-like canopies, the air heavier and warmer than anything they had felt since Boston, carrying the smell of river water and something floral that Damon couldn't identify. The historic district sat in quiet grids of cobblestone and iron railings, the buildings pressed close together in a way that felt less like density and more like the city was keeping its own counsel. They had driven down from Asheville overnight, trading the wheel every few hours. Naomi had slept in stretches, and during the stretches she was awake, she sat looking out the window without talking, which Damon had learned by now to respect completely. What Dr. Hale had confirmed in Asheville wasn't something you processed quickly. It was the kind of truth that needed to settle through you at its own pace, finding the places it changed and the places it didn't. The address from Grant's final map led them to a private legal archive on a quiet street 2 blocks from the riverfront. It operated out of a narrow 3-story building with dark green shutters and a brass plate beside the door that read only Meridian Document Services. The kind of establishment that existed for clients who needed absolute discretion and were willing to pay for the infrastructure that made it possible. A woman at the front desk reviewed the reference number Damon provided, a sequence printed on the bottom of Grant's map that he hadn't fully understood until now, and made a call that lasted less than 3 minutes. Then she led them to a room on the 2nd floor, plain and well lit, with a single table and 2 chairs. On the table was a metal document case, sealed, with a combination lock. Beside it, a small envelope. Inside the envelope was a note with a 6-digit number. Naomi looked at it. She left the combination. She planned for someone to reach this room, Damon said. She just didn't know how long it would take. Naomi entered the combination. The case opened cleanly. Inside was a document package that represented, in physical form, the full weight of what the missing woman had spent years building. The corporate fraud evidence, transaction records, forged agreement copies, third-party correspondence that connected the voices on the recording to specific decisions made across 3 companies, was organized with the same precision as everything else she had left behind. Each document cross-referenced the next. Each piece built on the one before it. It was airtight in a way that courtroom-ready evidence rarely was. But beneath the evidence package, there was something else. A letter, single envelope, sealed with wax, and on the front, in the handwriting from the final journal pages, 1 word: Naomi. Damon stepped back without being asked. Naomi picked it up and held it for a moment before opening it. She read it slowly. Damon watched her face without meaning to, the way you watch someone's expression when they're reading something that matters, looking not for the content, but for what the content does to the person receiving it. After a few minutes, she set the letter down on the table. She says she found me 3 months after the accident, Naomi said. Her voice was even, careful. She had already been watching the people from the meeting, monitoring whether anyone was looking for the witness. She paused. Someone was. They had identified that there might have been someone in the East Corridor, Damon said. They weren't certain, but they were looking. Naomi smoothed the edge of the letter with her thumb. She says that by the time she found me, I had already lost the memory of that night. The accident had taken it. She stopped for a moment. She says she considered that a kindness. What did she do then? She removed the event from my employment history, changed the staffing record for that night, so my name didn't appear. Then she built a version of the story around herself. Let it be assumed that she was the silent witness, that she was the one people should be looking for. Naomi looked up. She became the target so I wouldn't be one. And then she disappeared entirely, Damon said. And then she disappeared. Naomi looked back at the letter. She says I was never responsible for what I heard. I was in the wrong corridor at the wrong moment, carrying documents for a job that paid $40, and I had no idea what was on the other side of that door. She was quiet for a moment. She says the only thing she ever needed from me was to live well, that if this letter reached me, it meant the evidence had finally found the right hands, and her work was done, and I should consider myself free of all of it. Damon looked at the document package on the table. Years of work, a woman's entire identity sacrificed to protect a 22-year-old event assistant who had heard something she shouldn't have and then forgotten it before anyone could ask her about it. She never wanted recognition, Naomi said quietly. She just wanted it to be over. Damon picked up the evidence package carefully. We need to get this to the right people, he said. Independent. outside any structure connected to the companies involved. Grant has contacts, Naomi said. I have better ones. He looked at her. This goes to independent legal counsel and corporate investigators, people who don't have a stake in the outcome. Naomi nodded. She folded the letter and placed it in the inside pocket of her jacket, close, the way you keep something you're not ready to put down yet. She looked around the small, plain room. The empty case, the table, the window with its view of the Savannah street outside, and the oak trees trailing their moss in the warm afternoon air. She gave everything, Naomi said. Not to Damon, not really, just to the room. Damon didn't answer that. Some things didn't need a response. They needed to be carried. The case closed quietly. That was the part Damon hadn't expected. He had spent enough years in rooms where power changed hands to know that the loudest moments were rarely the most significant ones. The evidence package from Savannah was delivered to a team of independent legal professionals and corporate investigators through channels that left no room for interference, and the process that followed was methodical, unglamorous, and final. No headlines, no dramatic courtroom scenes. The men whose voices lived on that 17-year-old tape were quietly removed from their positions and handed to the appropriate legal processes through avenues that bypassed every structure they had spent years building to protect themselves. It took 3 weeks. Grant Sullivan sent a single text message when it was done. 2 words. It's finished. Elliot Mercer, Damon heard later through a mutual contact, had gone to a coastal town in Maine and was reportedly writing something for the first time in 11 years. Nobody knew what it was yet, and Damon had the feeling that was deliberate. The missing woman was never publicly identified. That had been Naomi's one firm condition when the legal process began, and the team handling the case had honored it without argument. Whoever she was, wherever she had gone, she had earned the right to stay gone if that was what she wanted. The evidence stood entirely on its own. Her name wasn't necessary for any of it. Naomi had spent the 3 weeks after Savannah at the mansion, returning to her routines with a quietness that Damon watched carefully, without commenting on. She cooked in the mornings. She managed the house with the same efficiency she always had. She read in the evenings in the chair by the library window. But something had shifted in her. Not broken or damaged, just recalibrated. Like a compass that had been slightly off for years, and had finally found true north. Damon gave her the space she needed. He also gave himself some, which was harder. 4 weeks after Savannah, he found her in the kitchen on a Tuesday morning, making coffee with the particular focus she gave to things she was doing, while thinking about something else entirely. I want to show you something, he said. She looked up. Tonight, he said. It's not a gala, no guests. Just, come. She studied him for a moment with that look she had, the one that evaluated without appearing to. All right, she said, and turned back to the coffee. He almost smiled. Charleston was 4 hours south. He drove them down in the late afternoon, and Naomi sat in the passenger seat the way she had on all those drives across the Northeast, easy in the quiet, watching the landscape change through the window. But this drive was different from those. The urgency was gone. There was no receipt to follow, no map marking to locate, no layer of the story left to uncover, just road, and the lowering sun, and 2 people who had been through something together and were still figuring out what that meant. They reached the harbor as the light was going gold. Charleston Harbor in the early evening was the kind of place that made noise feel inappropriate. The water moved in long, slow swells, the bridges and distant shorelines sitting in the haze of late day. Everything softened and unhurried. Damon parked near the waterfront, and they walked out along the promenade, the warm air carrying the familiar salt and river smell that southern coastal cities all seemed to share. They stopped near the railing above the water. For a while, neither of them said anything, which felt right. Then Damon turned to face her. Naomi was looking out at the harbor, the evening light doing something to her face that he had no practical way to describe, just warm and still and entirely present in the moment, in a way that some people spent their whole lives failing to achieve. He had been thinking about what he wanted to say for 4 weeks. He had rewritten it in his head approximately 100 times. Standing here, he decided to stop editing and just say it. "The night of the gala," he said, "I invited you as a joke. I've thought about that every day since." She turned to look at him. "I'm not asking you to forget it happened," he said. "I'm telling you it was wrong, and that I understood that the moment you walked into that room. Not because of how you looked, though." He stopped, recalibrated. "You were extraordinary. But because of how you moved through it, like someone who knew exactly who they were and didn't need the room to confirm it." Naomi was quiet. "Everything after that," he continued, "the hotels, the journals, the recordings, the drives, I've watched you face things most people would have walked away from. You found out your past had been carrying weight you didn't even know about, and you didn't collapse under it. You just kept moving forward." The water shifted below them. "I fell in love with you somewhere between Burlington and Asheville," he said simply. "I'm not entirely sure of the exact location." Naomi looked at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she smiled. It was the kind of smile that didn't announce itself loudly, the kind that started in the eyes before it reached anything else. And it was the most unguarded he had ever seen her. "You have terrible timing," she said. "I know. And you started this whole thing with a joke. I know that too." She looked back at the water briefly, then back at him. "Burlington," she said. "It was Burlington. I noticed somewhere around the lake." He looked at her. "That you were different from what I assumed," she said quietly. "That you were worth paying attention to." He reached out and she let him take her hand, and they stood at the railing above Charleston Harbor as the last of the light gave itself up to the evening, the water below them dark and calm and moving steadily forward the way water always does, regardless of everything that has passed above it. Behind them was a mystery solved, a debt honored, a woman somewhere living freely under whatever name she had finally chosen for herself. Ahead was nothing that needed to be figured out tonight, just the harbor, and the two of them, and all the ordinary, unhurried time stretching out in front of them.